We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph from Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 59a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the Machlokas Tanoim in terms of, let's say you have a situation where the husband is makdish, the moser, the extra earnings that she has beyond the fixed amount, the extra earnings that his wife has. And so there was a Machlokas Amoraim. Rav and Shmuel said that moser that he's makdish only becomes hektish after she dies and he inherits it, meaning to say he does not have control of those earnings while she is alive. And Rav Ada bar Rava says no, the moser is considered hektish even while she is alive because the husband has control of those extra earnings even while she is alive. And the Gemara now explains mizonos tachas ma'aseh yadeh u'ma kesef tachas moser. Rav and Shmuel, they hold that the mizonos is an exchange for the earnings. When he gives her mizonos, that's an exchange for earnings, and the ma kesef, which he gives her weekly, that's an exchange for anything beyond the fixed amount of the earnings. V'kevan de lo kayoiv lo ma kesef, like the Gemara said in the previous Amud, since the case of the Mishnah is he's not giving her, he's giving her mizonos, but he's not giving her that ma kesef, so therefore moser dido have. Therefore that extra beyond the fixed amount, that extra amount of earnings that she earns, that actually goes to her, and that's why it does not become hektish while she is alive when the husband tries to say that it is hektish. Rather, it becomes hektish after she dies. And the Gemara now continues and explains Rav Ada bar Rava. Rav Ada bar Rava Savar, Rav Ada bar Rava holds tiknu mizonos tachas moser. They said that the mizonos was an exchange for the extra u'ma kesef, and the weekly ma kesef tachas ma'aseh yadeh. That's an exchange for earnings, and so therefore v'kevan de kayoev la mizone, since he's giving her the mizonos, so moser did they have it. So the mizonos is an exchange for the moser, for the extra earnings, and therefore he does have a right to the extra earnings, and he can make it hektish. And the Gemara continues, so what is Rav and Shmuel and Rav Ada bar Rava, what are they arguing about? And the answer is as follows, Mar Savar Midi Deshchiach, Mimidi Deshchiach. Rav and Shmuel, they hold that the earnings correspond to the mizonos because those are all common things. It's common for her to earn, and it's common for him to provide mizonos, and therefore those are in exchange for one another. Umar Savar Midi Dekayitz, Mimidi Dekayitz. But Rav Ada bar Rava says no, you have to take something that is a set amount, meaning the ma kesef is a set amount, and that corresponds to the Ma'aseh Yadayim, which also, as we said in the Mishnah later on, that was also a fixed amount, and so that's why they're in exchange for one another. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, Tiknu mizonos tachas Ma'aseh Yadayim. It says explicitly that the mizonos is in exchange for the Ma'aseh Yadayim. So you see that it's the mizonos for the Ma'aseh Yadayim, and is not the mizonos for the extra beyond the fixed amount of the Ma'aseh Yadayim. And the Gemara answers, Eimot tachas moser Ma'aseh Yadayim. You're right, according to the other explanation, you'll have to say what it really means is mizonos is in exchanged for the extra beyond the fixed amount of her earnings. That's what Rav Ada bar Rava will have to say. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof, this is from a Mishnah later on, Emeino nosein la ma kesef litzarchef, he doesn't give her the ma kesef for her needs, Ma'aseh Yodeh Shalah, so then she keeps the earnings. So it sounds like over here that the ma kesef is in exchange for the Ma'aseh Yodayim. That sounds like what Rav Ada bar Rava said. And to that the Gemara says, no, you could say, Eima moser Ma'aseh Yodeh Shalah. What it means is the ma kesef is in exchange for the extra of her earnings. That is the exchange. It can follow Rav and Shmuel. But the Gemara says, 1 second, but on that very Mishnah it says, Mahi Osalo, it says about the fixed amount of her earnings. What does she do for him? What does she produce for him? Mishkal Chamesh Sloim Shasi b'Yehuda. In Yehuda it is the weight of 5 sela of Shasi, of the warp thread. So you see, we are talking about the fixed amount of what she produces. And the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, no, this is what it means to say, Ma'aseh Yodeh Kamahave, what is her Ma'aseh Yodayim? The Leida Moser Dida. That way we'll know what is considered extra beyond the fixed amount. Kama, how much is it? Mishkal Chamesh Saloim Shasi b'Yehuda. Again, it's 5 Saloim of the warp thread in Yehuda. Shein Eser Saloim b'Goliel. That's the same as 10 Saloim in Goliel. And the Gemara continues, Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says, Halacha ke Reb Yochanan Hasanler. The halacha is like Reb Yochanan Hasanler in our Mishnah. Again, Reb Yochanan Hasanler said, even when it comes to the moser, the husband does not have the ability to be makdish the earnings of his wife. And the Gemara says, Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Does Shmuel really say this? And Rashi over here explains, Mi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Does Shmuel really say this? V'Amar Shmuel Le'el. But Shmuel said earlier on the previous Amud, B'Moser La'achar Misa Pligi, that the Machlokas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler was specifically with the Moser La'achar Misa, and Rabbi Meir says it becomes Kadosh La'achar Misa, and Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler says it's still Chulin. V'Alam Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler, it was on that case that Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler said Chulin, that it's Chulin, it doesn't even become hektish after she dies. V'Ava B'Dahash Now, even though everybody agrees at this point, once she dies, certainly it belongs to him, so it belongs to the husband. husband liachar misa, after she dies. Alma, so what do we see? Time of Rabbi Yochanan, the reason of Rabbi Yochanan Sandler is mishum davar shelo bali olamu, is because he cannot be makdash because it doesn't yet exist. It's not in his rishus. Shadayin lo mesa, because she hasn't died yet. Ve'ein lo rishus b'moser, he doesn't have any rishus over that extra earnings. Hoel ve'eno ma'ala lo ma kesef, because he's not giving her the ma kesef, as we said before. Uv'hamar Shmuel halacha, and it's in this case that Shmuel is saying the halacha, meaning by virtue of the fact that Shmuel is saying the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan Sandler, Shmuel seems to be saying that when you have a davar shelo bali olam, a person cannot be makdish a davar shelo bali olam. And so on that the Gemara asks, v'hatanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, konem shani osa leficha, let's say a wife says to her husband that whatever I earn is not going to go to you. So eino tzarech lahafer, so the Tanna Kama says he doesn't need to annul that vow because the earnings have to go to him. That's an obligation. Rabbi Akiva says yafer, no, he should annul the vow. Shema tadif olav yeser min haroilo, because maybe what's going to happen is she'll have more earnings than the normal amount. She'll have extra, and that already is going to be part of the vow, so he should annul the vow so he can have those earnings. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says yafer, the reason why he should annul the vow, Shema yigrashen, because maybe he'll divorce her. Utei asur lachzor. Now if that vow is in place, it's going to be forbidden for him to remarry her, and so therefore he should annul the vow for that reason. And Rashi over here explains, the Tanna Kama says, Eino tzarech lahafer, he doesn't need to annul the vow, neder zeh she'ein ba koach lakdisho, there was no koach there to make it sanctified in the first place, lefi shuhu shalo, because the earnings belong to him anyway, according to Tanna Kama. And Rabbi Akiva says, Shema tadif olav, no, the reason why he should annul it is, what if there's extra? Yosem mimasha paskul lachacham mishkal chamish slime, there was that fixed amount of the 5 slime, let's say there's more earnings than that. The moser ze'ena shalo, because that extra is not his. V'yechola lahakdisho, she's able to sanctify it, she's able to make it forbidden to him. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, Af ikar ma'aseh yodeh tzarech hafara, even her main earnings, even the fixed amount, he needs to annul it. Shema yigrashena, maybe he'll divorce her. V'yehi neder chal, and then the neder will be chal. Shemi shagar she'ena mishubedes lo l'ma'aseh yodeh, because once already there's a divorce, then she doesn't have to give the earnings to him. And Rashi continues in Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, utei asura lachzor lo, then it's going to be forbidden for her to remarry him. L'fisha nezar ma'aseh yodeh olav, because now her earnings are usher to him. V'yefshel lo lizor shelo titchon v'lo tefe v'chol sham malachas hashnuyos b'mishnaseno sheisha osa lebal. If they're going to go get remarried, it's impossible that she's not going to do certain things for her husband. And the Gemara continues, V'yomar Shmuel, and Shmuel said on this Mishnah, halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. As Rashi over here says, V'yomar Shmuel halacha al malicha sheyigrashena chol haneder. You see that according to Shmuel, after there's a divorce, the neder will be chal. Al ma'adam makdish davar shelo bali olam shadayin lo girshi. You see that a person can be makdish something that doesn't yet exist because there wasn't yet a divorce. So here Shmuel is saying a person can be makdish davar shelo bali olam. And so the Gemara answers, Ki Yomar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. When did Shmuel say the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? L'hadafa, he's not talking about the main earnings, he's talking about any extra earnings that she has. For that issue, we're afraid maybe there's going to be some extra, and therefore he should annul the vow. But the Gemara says, V'leima halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri l'hadafa, but if that was the case, Shmuel should have said that. The halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri when there's extra, or because of the extra. Inami ein halacha k'Tanna Kama, or he could have phrased it that the halacha is not like the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama said he doesn't have to annul the vow. No, he should annul the vow. Inami halacha Rabbi Akiva, or he could have simply said that halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, because that's exactly what Rabbi Akiva said. Rabbi Akiva said he should annul the vow because of the possibility of the extra earnings. Rashi over here says, Ki Yomar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lahadafa kamar. He wasn't talking about the regular earnings, he's talking about the hadafa. Kolomar halacha diyofer. What that really means is that Shmuel just meant the halacha is he should annul the vow. V'lav mitayme, but not going like the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. De'ilu Rabbi Yochanan ikar ma'aseh yodeh tzarech hafar, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, so the main ma'aseh yodayim that needs annulment because of the possibility of divorce. V'lishmuel misham hadafa shematadif al haroi hu damar yafer. According to Shmuel, no, it's because there's a possibility that she's going to earn extra, she'll produce extra, and that's why you need to annul the vow. Now the Gemara here could have also asked that even within that possibility that she earns extra, it's also a davar shelo bali olam deholo nasa, because it's not created yet. But the Gemara is going to ask another question that again you could have simply said it in another fashion. You could have said the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva or some other way. Ein halacha k'Tanna Kama. He could have said the halacha is not like the Tanna Kama. Damar ein tzarech lafer el yafer. Tanna Kama said he doesn't need to annul the vow. He really does need to annul the vow. It doesn't make sense to phrase it that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And so the Gemara answers Elamar of Yosef. Rather, Rav Yosef says, Konamos Kohamrit. Are you asking a question from Konamos, from this idea that a person answers his items on somebody else? Shani Konamos. Konamos are different. They're in a different category. Mitoch Shadamoser Peiros Chaveru Allah. Because of the fact that by Konamos, a person is able to take the fruits of his friend and aser those fruits to himself. So that's already a chiddush by konamos. So adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. So also a person is able to be makdish something that does not yet exist. You can't ask a question from konamos on our case over here. And Rashi over here explains, Elamar Rav Yosef, rather Rav Yosef says, Liolam halacha, really the halacha is, Umitaime ko'amar, he really was saying the halacha is like Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, Umishum shama yigreshena, Shmuel was concerned maybe there'd be a divorce, but you can't bring a proof from that case to our case over here of a husband being makdish the earnings of his wife. Veshani konamos is different by konamos, hektish sheno hektish lakol. Konamos is a kind of hektish that's not fully hektish, it's not hektish for everybody. El alodam echad b'lashon konim, it's just one person is prohibited. Mitoch shu tofes b'makom shein stam hektish tofes, and that kind of hektish, it takes effect even where normal hektish does not take effect. Sh'adam oser peres chaveru ala. For example, by konamos, a person can aser somebody else's fruits on him. V'yomer konim peros ploni ala, he could say those person's fruits are aser to me. Uvistam hektish. Now, by a normal case of hektish, ain't adam makdish davar sheino shalo. Person can't be makdish something that's not his. Hilkach adam oser olav nami davar shalo boli olam. Therefore, by konamos, a person can also forbid something that is not yet boli olam. Avamas nisim v'makdish hektish gomerari. But our mission is talking about where the husband is trying to take the earnings of his wife and making them normal hektish, not konamos. V'eno memar litvos kekonim. Therefore, it's not as effective as konem, and you can't ask from one case to the other. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Abaye said to Rav Yosef, Bishlama adam oser peros chaveru olav. No, I understand why a person is able to forbid the fruits of his friend upon himself. Shekein adam oser peros al chaveru, because that's the reverse, that's the inverse, the fact that a person is able to take his fruits and aser them to his friend. That all makes sense. But are you saying a person can take something that doesn't exist and make that forbidden to his friend? Shekein ein adam oser peros chaveru al chaveru. A person can't take his friend's fruits and make them usher to his friend. That's already one step removed, and therefore Abaye says it would not make sense to say, even by konamos, it would not make sense to say that if a person is not allowed to be makdish davar shelo boli olam, that suddenly by konamos, that should work. And so the Gemara continues, Elo Amar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua, rather Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua says, Bo'meres yikdashu yadei lo sehem. What we're talking about over here is not where she says that my earnings should be prohibited. What she's saying in this case of konamos is that my hands should be considered like hektish, the yadayim isnu ba'olam, that actually the hands are in the world. In other words, we're not talking about a davar shelo bali olam at all. And the Gemara says, but if she says that, is that really going to create hektish over here? But isn't she meshubet to him anyway? Like we said, she has to work for him. Her hands, her earnings go to him anyway. So how does this even take effect? And to that, the Gemara says, no, she says, when I am divorced, when we are divorced, that's when my hands will be sanctified, so to speak. So again, we're not talking here about a dover shelo bali olam. But the Gemara says, but is there really such a thing? The ilo hashtalo kaddish, that if she tried to do it right now, it wouldn't work, because what she earns goes to her husband. Well, it can make kaddish, but she's able to say that later on, when there's a divorce, it becomes sanctified. And the Gemara says to that, Rabbi Loi says, Alam alo, no, why not? Why isn't it possible? Ilu ha'omer l'chavero, for example, let's say that a person said to his friend, Sada zusha ani mocher loch, this field which I will sell to you, l'kashakachena mimchotzi kadesh, when I purchase it back from you, it will become holy. Milo kacha, in that case, isn't it going to be holy? So over there, even though right now he's not able to do it, he's selling it, but when he purchases it back, it's going to become kadosh. But the Gemara says that's not a good proof. Ma'askif lo Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked on that. Midami, is that comparable? Hasam biyado l'hakdish, over there, it's in his power to make it sanctified right now. He has the ability now to do it. But over here, ain't biyado l'garish esatzma. She has no ability to divorce herself, to get divorced. She has no control over that process. And the Gemara says, holo damya, rather, if you're going to compare it to our case to another case of a field, it would be comparable to the following. Let's say a person says to his friend, this field that I already sold to you, I have no rishus over this field, that when I buy it from you, it will be holy. The low kach, in that case, it's not sanctified because he has no ability, no control to force the person to sell it to him. And so the Gemara says, Maskif lo Rav Papa, but Rav Papa asks on this, Midami, is that really comparison? Hasam gufa upeirus biyada de lokech. The case of the field that you gave, the actual field, the fruits are all in the hands of the person who purchased it. So of course, the person who sold it has no control. But hacha gufa biyadahu, but over here, her own body, it's in her possession, so therefore she does have a little more control. And he says, Halo dami, rather if you're going to compare it again, it should be compared to the following. Ela la'omer lechaveru, it should be compared to someone who says to his friend. And Rashi over here explains, Bo'omeres yikdashu yadai v'chulu, the case of the konamus is when she's sanctifying her hands. Sha'hamalacha kamisha basal liolam, that's as if it is a davar shabal liolam. V'al hagerish and shalobo kamasik v'yazil. And when the Mishnah goes on to talk about other things of why it is that he should annul the vow, we're talking about gerish, and the divorce hasn't happened yet. Umasnizin ba'omer ma'isi yadecha hekdesh, and our Mishnah is talking about really a davar shalobal liolam, because we're talking about the earnings, not her hands, but the earnings being hekdesh. But the Gemara says, Umika midi kalamar tirtzis lo baliolam. So the Gemara means to say you've answered up the fact in terms of lo baliolam. The malacha lo baliolam, because the malacha is not yet in the world. The gerish and lo tirtzis, but you haven't answered the question in terms of the divorce. Dilu hashta les lo reshusa lakdushe vehechi kadosh lakamei. Because if she's not able to make it hekdesh right now because he has possession of her earnings, so then how could it become sanctified later on? And Rashi continues, Alama lo, why can't she? Bitmiya milo kidshe mochra v'chazar v'lokcha. Again, the Gemara in a case of a field, let's say he sells it and then buys it back, so he would be able to make it hekdesh at that later point. Biyado lakdisha, but then the Gemara said that's not a comparison, because there it's in his possession at the time he makes a statement. Sharei achshav shalo, right now it says he hasn't sold it yet. V'chihechi dilo akdasha hashta kidsha, ki amar nami tikdash l'kamei kidsha. Just like he can make it holy now, he can make it holy later. Halo damia maskana dekushi, the Gemara says, no, if you're really going to compare it, this is all part of the question. Hasam gabi macharti loch ein lo achshav bolo gufalo peiros. Ve'en adam makdash davar sheina shalo. If you want to compare it to a case, you should compare it to a situation where he has no possession over the field at this time, just like she has no control in terms of divorce. But then the Gemara said, no, she does have a little more control. Hacha gufa biyadu v'ariyikdashu yadai amra. Her body is in her hands, and therefore she's saying, my hands should be holy. There is some comparison. Halo damya maskanta da askaftehi. This is really the conclusion of the question. We're going to find the real comparison over here, again, between our case and a case, let's say, of an item. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis.